Good evening and welcome to another News and Views. I'm your host, Don Burgess, and tonight we're going to be talking about a topic that's been in the news quite a bit lately, and that's domestic violence. And we are joined by Laurie Shiell and Dany Penn. Laurie, why don't we start with you and tell us a little bit about what you do and why you do it.
Sure. Thank you, Don. So I am the executive director at the Center Against Abuse. This is an organization that provides services to survivors of domestic abuse and sexual assault, anyone over the age of 18. We also provide education in the community on this. I do this because I had a great grandmother that was involved in a very abusive relationship. And so I honor her every time I serve someone in our community.
Okay. And Dany?
Hi, my name is Dany Penn. I am the founder of Women's ACT standing for Action Change Today. And we are an advocacy group about equality, justice, empowerment, and support for women who are survivors of sexual assault, violence, and domestic abuse. We are an advocacy group that helps bring awareness to the issue and to the already available services and programs on island. We work with all the agencies and charities that offer supporting programs and resources by making the referrals.
Right. So why did you decide to found this?
So I started off founding the advocacy group because I realized that we have services and resources available on island, but having someone to advocate for funding and that we needed to bring awareness to these services was the reason that I actually decided to found the group. And making it also another way of access for people in the community to get in touch with these available programs.
So to help our audience understand, how would both of you define domestic abuse?
So I would define domestic abuse as a number of behaviors, unwanted behaviors that are perpetrated against an individual, in particular a current or former partner, that are used to gain and maintain power and control over that partner.
Mm-hmm.
And Dany?
Yeah. And exactly what Laurie said, but it also can be physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and financial. And it's a way of causing harm to somebody through control. And the word domestic itself means it's a form of relationship where you find individuals cohabiting or living together in a shared space.
Just to follow up on that, can you give, because everyone's more, I guess, familiar with actual physical abuse and some of the other kind. Can you list some examples that you're aware of maybe spiritual abuse or financial abuse or any of the other two that you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. So financial abuse is when one is controlling all the means of finances and the other person has to ask or seek permission in order to get access to that money in order to, whether it's to buy groceries or supplies and materials and basic needs. Spiritual abuse is when someone's forcing their viewpoint on somebody and demanding that they convert or change their lifestyle and way of living to fit the needs of the abuser or perpetrator.
Does domestic abuse also happen to men? I mean, we don't hear about that very much, but how common is that in Bermuda?
Yeah, it definitely happens to men, Don. It's not as widely reported, but we know that it happens. We have been receiving information from men on this, and we know that we've had calls from others to say that a male's in trouble. The male may not have called us, but a friend or a family member or even a coworker has contacted us to talk about some things that they're seeing in that person's relationship. So we know for sure that it's happened. What happens with men is that they tend not to report. They feel even a greater shame that they are in this situation, and or they feel that they're not in an abusive situation. They can handle this matter.
Yeah. And to add to that, also at Women's ACT, we've actually have a higher number of men contacting us, uncles and brothers and fathers, who are trying to get information on how to get access to services and how they can help, because oftentimes men are witnesses to also their mothers and sisters getting abused.
Right. Why do you think it is that sometimes women, and we just talked about men, but women don't seek the help that they need?
It's a number of reasons,
Mm-hmm.
Dawn. So it can stem from, like I stated earlier, it can stem from shame.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want others to know their business. It can stem from, well, what does help look like? Because I don't have any finances, so I
Mm-hmm.
stay with this person. It could be that I honestly love this person and I don't want to see them getting in trouble. It can be that if I leave, this person has threatened to kill me or do harm to my kids. When someone leaves an abusive relationship, their chances of harm increases 75%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And along with that, with the financial abuse, and especially when they have children and lack of support, women who are often in abusive situations are often cut off from their family and friends and have nowhere to go. And again, this is all means of control and is a strategic tactic by abusers. And so when women don't have a place to go, they have no money and no means to provide for their family, especially their children, or they have no job, no housing, it does make it very difficult for them to actually envision themselves leaving because of not knowing. It's the unknown basically for them. And women who are working, they risk also losing their jobs with the idea that, will my workplace still allow me to continue working? Will they be my supporting network? Will they be my security? Because we know that abusers also show up at workplaces and instigate gaslighting techniques and behaviors with managers and staff and other employees. And so victims also have to consider, will my workplace be my support system, or will they actually not be my supporting system?
Right. And the thing is, Don, is that the Center Against Abuse, can assist these people through that. Mm-hmm. Many people, even those that are non-Bermudian, they may not speak English. And so that too is for them a barrier to receiving assistance. So, the Center Against Abuse definitely provides that assistance for those individuals to get out of an abusive relationship.
Definitely.
How often does that happen? Like maybe a woman or a man has married a Bermudian with a promise of, XYZ, and then they get here and the situation's a lot different than whatever the social media messages and the talk that they've had before.
Right. We get at least 1 to 2 calls a week in reference to that.
And for myself, because I have access to a very diverse community, it's a constant daily thing where it is happening, and it's at such a high volume. And because there are many women, like you said, who don't know the language, and there are other cultural barriers or other means in place where the abuser has now cut them off from their families from abroad, or they don't have any communication device, because many times many women don't have their own cell phone, or if they do have a cell phone, it's being tracked or looked at. So there's so many forms of control where a woman trying to seek help, it's really difficult.
Now, I don't know if this is the reality or not, but there's a perception that alcohol or drugs may feed into domestic abuse. How true is that?
What I would say is that an individual was already abusive. The alcohol may make them more abusive, but they already had those abusive tendencies. What happens when you have an abuser is that an abuser, what you will find is that they will not attack their friends that are at the bar drinking with them and things like that. They will go home to that person that is their target. So it's not the alcohol, because they can maintain their behaviors when they're with friends and around others. So that just lets us know that they are in total control of what they do and how they do it. They decide to perpetrate their behaviors upon their loved ones or supposed loved ones.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to mention also that sometimes we have to look beyond the moment of celebration, because oftentimes when we have festive activities and celebrations, such as, for example, Christmas, where families get together and there's alcohol and drinking involved, and then when these families leave the site and go home, oftentimes that's when the abuse will happen. So there was one year where we saw a skyrocket of women being abused on Christmas night at 3 a.m, because that's when everyone has returned home and not in the sight of the rest of the family. The abuse takes place inside the private home.
What sort of numbers would we see in an average year of reports of domestic abuse?
So for us, we get over 150 annually for domestic abuse matters, and that's with includes men and women. I would say for the men's side, that might be around maybe 5 to 10 individuals out of those numbers.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, just running the quick math in my head, that's about 4 a week on average. Okay,
Yeah.
With the holidays maybe spikes. So
yeah.
But those are the ones reported, not the ones that have not been able to come forth.
Correct.
Right. How often, you sort of mentioned it just before, but how often do you hear somebody say, well, I know he loves me, I know she loves me, or I can change the person? How common is that from someone who's a victim?
You know, that is very common from a victim. What they're looking for is that individual that they first met, that individual that they fell in love with, what we call the representative, the individual who wooed them, the individual that showed them what they wanted to see. So that is very common for someone to say that they are in love with the person, that they're looking for them to change, that is there a program to help them, that they've tried counseling, that they've done everything that they can to assist this individual with sending them back to the person that they initially met. And so that is a real, that keeps individuals, I would say victims, in a position of being in an abusive relationship longer, because they're looking to assist this person in any way they can to help them to get better, just to change their behaviors, to deal with whatever is hindering them. And so, yeah, it might be they may try to get them to go to church. It may be that they may try to get them to go to counseling. It may be that they've left them and, oh, they've learned their lesson now, so let me go back. You know, it's a lot of different things that victims will say in order to try and maintain that relationship with their loved one at time, until it just gets too much for them and they're like, okay, no, it's no more I can do for this individual, because I'm pouring more of myself into them than I'm actually pouring into myself. And so that's kind of one of the wake-up calls for them.
Yeah.
In Bermuda, why hasn't domestic abuse been talked about more? I mean, recently we've talked about it a lot, but is there some shame or taboo that in general society that we feel like we don't want to talk about this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, domestic abuse, you know, I don't want anything to do with that. It's not a feel good. Like, whereas, you know, promoting the arts is a feel good. You're doing something good. Where domestic abuse, it's definitely not a feel good. It's opening up airing out someone's dirty laundry, as it would be. And that could be anyone. That could be someone that's in the police force. That could be someone that's an executive at a top reinsurance agency. So it can be anyone's dirty laundry being aired out, and people just don't want to get involved in that. You know, we've come through a time and period where it was like, oh, that's their business, that's personal, you know, that's a private matter. But as we realize, you know, that this is actually a community matter, this is a human rights matter, this is a matter that we all need to be involved with in order to end domestic abuse in Bermuda.
I just want to talk about something you just said, because it sounded like it goes through the whole spectrum as far as financial. It could be somebody who maybe not earning as much, but you just mentioned somebody in the reinsurance industry as well.
I just want to add to that also. You know, an abuser can take on any guise. They can, like Laurie said, they can be a police officer, teachers, lawyers, and even church members. And we have to remember, we mustn't stereotype an abuser into a specific role or even community.
Yeah. So going into this, besides the wide range of financial situations, I mean, I'm assuming that it hits across all racial conditions as well,
Yes, definitely.
and religiosity as well.
Yes, it does. And you'll find is that individuals who are deemed to be religious will actually stay in an abusive situation longer, because they're looking to say, you know, I married this individual for life. This is who God placed in my life. And so they do everything that they can to maintain that relationship with that individual, for fear that they may be ostracized by their church member, or even feel like they're sinning against God if they leave that person. But individuals have to recognize that, you know, God didn't establish a marriage whereby their partner was going to be abusive to them. God is actually against that, because you should be loving your spouse just the way as God loves you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times that added pressure of being judged at least in a religious situation, tends to make it worse, doesn't it?
Well, in the
Yes,
church
definitely.
setting, I'll let Laurie go.
Definitely, you feel more judged, I would say. I've even had people tell me they've left their church, they've left the religion, because they felt ostracized by others, that they weren't being honest about their spouse, who was also in the church, and that they were seen as a good person, and that they were lying on them, or they just didn't feel supported by their church members, because their church family was saying, well, what are you doing? You must not be submitting. You need to pray more. You need to do this more. And so they were putting the blame on the victim rather than putting the blame where it belonged, on the abuser.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention, within the church, you have to remember the church works as a collective body. So in terms of your situation, you're looking at your church as your supporting network. And when the church is not there for you, it can send a person completely away and turned off from continuing and being part of that community.
Well, I know of a situation where there was an abusive relationship, and the abuser confessed to the whole church and admitted to it, and then the church put pressure on the other person. Well, they've confessed and they admitted they did wrong, that they didn't feel like there was any appropriate response. They felt like, well, if they said it in front of the whole church, but they continued to along the same path, they felt like there was no hope.
Yeah, unfortunately, at times there are many individuals who are pastors, reverends, or who lead places of worship, and they are not familiar with how to handle domestic abuse matters. And so that can go all types of wrong, unfortunately, So what we encourage individuals to do that are in those positions is to allow us to come alongside them, to guide them and direct them, and to teach them how to handle those matters and to work with them.
And we have to remember, people do have good intentions, but it's the lack of training. And that's where the importance of taking on training and education is very vital, especially when you want to help somebody. You might have the intention of trying to help somebody, but you might not have all the means and knowledge of how to go about helping that person in the right way.
Is this an area where maybe part of the solution is to have some sort of like SCARS training, where we can have people in and have workshops so that people who are in positions of trust can help spot and identify these sorts of situations?
Definitely. I mean, they can contact the Center Against Abuse. We do a 9-week training course, an advocacy course that assists individuals with understanding domestic abuse and sexual assault, and assist them in helping individuals in those victimized positions.
So the Women's ACT Facebook page also allows our members to constantly share their news and information, and it's a platform in itself of also educating people about domestic violence around the world. But another resource that I have to mention is Center Against Abuse website. They have a whole listing of different resources that you can just log on and research and get right at the tip of your finger, right at your fingertips.
Yeah. Now, I've been in court recently. I do a lot of court reporting for Burr News, and over the last year, I saw one particular case where this one couple was in 5 different times, and I would say the gentleman was in 5 different times. The woman would often not show up to court. What can we do to help people who may recant what they tell the police? I know I was speaking to a lawyer, and they were talking about how Bermuda's laws could possibly change to make it more stringent, where if somebody reports and then they recant, there should be a mechanism in place to help protect the victim from themselves in this case.
Definitely. So I just wanted to add to that. Authorities should be trained to see through the case also, and should be able to continue advocating on behalf of the victim in the court system. A lot of times we do see police officers and social workers that want to advocate but don't know how to advocate. And this is where, again, we reiterate training is very important. And when victims come to authorities, they also need officers, lawyers, and social workers to be their advocate. Many victims do not know how to go about this route. Many don't even know how the process and protocols work. And many don't know how to use their voice within the system.
Right. I don't like
I would also add on that, it's important that the police and others get the forensic information to back up that individual story immediately.
Yes.
And that we try to get some type of domestic violence court whereby the individual can be seen as quickly as possible, because the sooner you see an individual, the less likely they are to recant their story, the less likely they are going to be pressured by someone to drop the charges that they have against the individual.
Mm-hmm.
How common is it for somebody to recant their story? Because I imagine it takes them a lot of courage to work up, report them in the first place. And then how often, do we have any figures on how often people recant their stories and don't want to go ahead and press charges?
I can say I haven't seen any figures on it. I would determine that it's probably maybe 50-50, but I honestly cannot say for sure, because there are individuals that we may never hear of that press charges and then went back and pulled them. So that would be a number that you would actually have to get from the police.
And I just have to mention also, many victims don't know that they can press charges. Again, it's lack of education and not knowing what their rights are. So when someone comes to the police station and is seeking help, police officers should also be able to let them know, you can press charges, and then elaborate what does that actually mean, entail, and look like. Because a lot of times you can say you can press charges, but an individual who is not familiar with the court system and the legal system at all does not understand that language or even can understand how that process will look like.
Correct. Additionally, if somebody calls the police and tells them the full story, they think that is pressing charges, and it's not. You have to actually go into the police station, put in a written information. The police type it up. You have to sign that piece of paper. And even then, you have to even state that you're pressing charges, because they may say, okay, well, you never said you were pressing charges. We just thought you were given a statement.
Yeah. I want to add to that also. We definitely need more sensitivity training in the court system with police officers and other social agencies involved, because all individuals that work with persons of trauma need to be trained on how they use their language, their actions, how they receive the person, communicate with the person, and work with the person.
I know we hear about PS, post-traumatic stress syndromes. This is like a person who's been living in it all the time. And so it's easy for them to change their mind or to be in denial, even if they've taken that first step. The court system could, one of this, I don't know, my familiarity with it, but do they have social workers assigned to a case when somebody presses charges?
To my knowledge, they don't. The social workers usually only become appointed by the court if there's a social inquiry.
Okay. What do you think?
To my knowledge, do not have a social worker that is there to assist someone who comes in to press charges.
However, they do give social workers if there are children involved, for the children.
Yes. So, as Dany stated, if there is a police call out to a home, and once the police get there, they find that there are children involved in a domestic or have witnessed a domestic, the police are mandated to contact Department of Child and Family Services, and then Child and Family Services do an investigation with that matter in regards to the children.
Now, I know, like in children's cases, like if they go to school with a black eye, suspiciously black eye on a regular basis, and say I ran into a doorknob, the schools and the teachers are required to do some reporting. Should there be some sort of law or something in place where, if maybe at workplaces that they see somebody coming in constantly covering up bruises and things, that they should have to report it?
I would think that will be an in-house policy and procedure of that workplace. And maybe that would be something that will fall under the Human Rights Commission. I don't know. but definitely a policy and procedure in the workplace for individuals so that they know that there is an open door policy to that they can get help, because it's important that individuals feel safe when they come to work. And what happens is that when you go to work, you don't forget about what happened the night before. This now affects your job performance. And so as Dany stated earlier, this can affect your job, whereby you're not performing at the level that you used to. And if you don't have someone there that will inquire with you as to why all of a sudden this is happening with you, you will find yourself, on the radar to be terminated because your job performance is very low. So it's important that human resources managers and even managers and supervisors understand when they see someone's work being unusually low, where they used to be a high level employee, that they should actually bring them in and start asking some questions. Is everything okay? Do you need to talk to me about anything? Do you need to take some time off to yourself? Can we assist in any way?
There's actually
dialogue.
There's actually some companies abroad already that have implemented that into their policy, where if any of their employees are going through an abusive situation, they are allowed to take some time off to move houses, to go to court, to gather their things together. So there are companies who are taking these measures already into place.
Yeah. And I know that we have spoken to a number of companies with our clients. We may say to them, look, do you need us to talk to your manager and give them some information? And individuals have been allowed to take time off. We had one company that actually enclosed and created a gated system for the area that the lady was in to ensure her safety while she was at work.
If somebody suspects that maybe one of their neighbors are being abused, I know there might be some fear of reporting or interfering in somebody else's business, or being pokey or snoopy. What should they do? What should be the standard that you should make a phone call to the police?
So if you hear something that doesn't sound right, that sounds like someone's life is maybe in danger or it's going to get out of hand, I would say the first thing you need to do is call 911 and get the police to that household. Yeah.
And your phone call is anonymous.
Yeah.
So
so if you don't want to mention who you are, you can say a concerned neighbor, a concerned individual.
Yeah.
So is the standard then you feel like their life is in danger, or if a couple's arguing, how do you determine that it moves up a level that the police need to get involved?
Well, if you're hearing it already, it's not keeping the peace in the community. If everyone can hear what's going on, that means it's escalated to a volume where someone clearly is being very loud for a reason. And when you're being loud, you're trying to seek help.
Right. So what sort of solutions can there be in the Bermuda situation to help decrease the number of domestic abuse situations or provide help for people who are in those sorts of situations?
When you know something, say something. Say something to the individual. Let them know that there is help available through Center Against Abuse. Let them know that the police are there to help them. Some people don't want to do it alone, so encourage them that you will go with them and assist them with making that report at the police, or come to Center Against Abuse to obtain some help, or even take them to the hospital should they need assistance with any type of medical, just be that support for that individual. What we encourage, as Dany stated earlier, is, follow Women's ACT on Facebook, follow Center Against Abuse on Facebook. Go on our website. We have a lot of resources on there that may be able to assist you. You may not even know that you're in an abusive situation. You can go on our webpage and you can find a sheet that will say, am I an abuser? And it takes you through some questions. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. If you don't feel safe coming to us, reach out to somebody that you do feel safe. Perhaps it's your doctor, where you're there alone with your doctor. Talk to them, and then they can assist you with a referral to us. Or anyone that you feel safe talking to, I would say talk to them. And for those that hear something or see something, say something.
And I also want to mention that domestic abuse and violence doesn't just occur with adult relationships. It also starts and happens with teenage dating relationships. So, we do have young girls who often approach Women's ACT also and trying to get understanding. Is my boyfriend abusive to me? And they're in high school. So, we definitely need more programming in school, in our curriculums, to teach healthy relationships.
Yeah. And in those cases, they would have to contact Department of Child and Family Services for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
In a younger person's situation, what are some factors for young girls about not wanting to report? How important is it for them to feel like they're being loved by somebody? I use love in quotation marks there, but especially like if it's their first relationship or their second relationship, how much more difficult is that for them? And how important is it to help break that chain right there?
It's a conversation that's definitely needed. And, for a young woman to actually even ask the question, that means she's already questioning the relationship itself, if it's a healthy one or it's not healthy. And having worked with young women who are in those kind of situations, the best thing you can do is listen and then give them the resources and let them know that they do have a voice and a choice.
Now, I know you both have a dinner engagement tonight. So before we wrap up here, I just want to give you a chance to say a few closing words to our audience. We'll start with Laurie.
Sure. I just want to finish off with what Dany was saying. Parents, it's never too early to talk to your children about abusive situations. You can start with talking about bullying, and then you can start talking about how friends treat you. You can start talking about not being called out of your name, those types of things. You can let them know what's right, what's wrong, where they can go for help, if it's to you, if it's to a counselor at the school. So it starts as early as in the schools, teaching your children to know the signs of what doesn't feel right. Tell them don't ignore those feelings because those are red flags. And so you want to encourage your children at an early age to understand and recognize red flags in any relationship. That way it leads them to understanding and recognizing red flags in adult relationships as well. And so it's important that we start teaching individuals, as Dany said, at a young age. And then as they grow into adults, hopefully when they see those signs, they'll get out of that abusive situation sooner.
And Dany?
And so what I want to mention is that, Women's ACT is an advocacy group. So getting involved means getting access to information. And maybe you might not need the information right now, but it's good to have it. So finding out, researching what services are already available on island and coming to support those programs already serviced on island without having to come up with a new program and overlapping services. That makes no sense at all. What we should do is work together for a united advocacy voice and build on the programs we already have, such as those with CAA, and pushing them out to the forefront and really pushing funding into those programs also.
All right. Well, I appreciate both your time. I know it's a busy evening for you, and especially knocking off after work and squeezing us in. But I really want to thank Laurie Shiell for the Center Against Abuse and Dany Penn for Women's ACT. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And in 2 weeks' time, Burn News and Views will be back. We'll have Cheryl Packwood and Craig Simmons, and we're going to be talking about the Bermuda economy. I'm your host this evening, Don Burgess, and as always, have a beautiful evening.